So I'm the host, and I will be debating with Munja about a topic of spiritual journey of a spiritualist. And Munja already did a couple of debates in the last weeks, and I wasn't here, so I don't know if any of you was here, but I would like to ask you were.
I mean,
Half.
half. Sorry.
Okay. So if you can tell us, Munja, more about how did this whole discussion start? Who was discussing last time?
It's really interesting. It's like we started, so the topic was the milestones in a seeker's journey. And we started this 2 Wednesdays back. And it's like every Wednesday we had a completely different audience. And the idea was to sort of like continue the conflict, to continue this, right? And hopefully, like today, we are hoping to just like finally finish it. So the conversation, how did we start this? So the first Wednesday we were discussing about, so we were having a discussion. So we were talking about what are the things that people start to do when they start a spiritual journey, or or when they, when they're seeking an alternative path. So what are the common things that people do? That's what we discussed.
So can you give us some examples of what you guys came up with? What is,
Yeah, so we had quite a range of responses. So like the most common ones and the ones that stood out the most were like eating healthy, going vegetarian, becoming a minimalist, then doing yoga, reading books, traveling, changing your habits, like changing the way you look, changing your dressing style. Yeah.
What would you, I mean, I can guess, how would you describe a minimalist?
So minimalist is, so in the context of that conversation, minimalist was like, people adapting more sustainable ways of living. So for example, going to live in a rural place, getting a tiny home, just clearing out, just simplifying. Yeah.
so that's interesting. So these are the examples that audience were giving,
Yeah.
like being vegetarian or doing meditation.
Yeah. Like silent meditation retreats, people attend these retreats.
So that's how people understand. That's what spiritual means.
Yeah, like when someone starts a spiritual path, like these are sort of like the evidence signs.
So that's
That's quite simple though, eh? As a beginning, looking at it, because I would consider that to be the base, just the first step. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be my question. How does that make one spiritual? Because, like, I know, I have some friends in my life who are vegetarian,
Yeah.
or who meditate, but they don't really seem to be like that spiritual. Like, yeah, they might be vegetarian, but they might not be interested at all in spirituality.
Yeah.
So how would you usually define that?
So it's a good point, that you guys are raising, that these things that they seem pretty external. So but I think they do play a role. They do have an influence in making in making spiritual life easier. So for example, I think it's much easier to to meditate or to do yoga in comfortable clothes than in business clothes. It's just easier, right? So similarly, when someone's vegetarian, or they're eating healthy, then the body is healthy. When people do yoga, it definitely helps to slow the mind down. It makes the body healthy. So the way I see it is that these things, they help us to make the body and mind healthy. And it's like, unless and until the body and mind is not healthy, how can we think about spirituality? Because then we'll always just be focused on the problems that the body and mind are giving us. So the same for for the minimalist as well, that like it can help you to have a relatively more free mind, because your financial worries are less, your distractions are less if you live simply. So I think they're as Peter was saying, that I think they're good stepping stones. But I think in of themselves, definitely, I don't think that they constitute as being spiritual. But I think they can help.
Right. So they are all basically stepping stones to go into something deeper.
Yeah.
They like externally help us
Yes.
to achieve something deeper.
Yeah.
So, so how would you then describe, so what about the mental state of a spiritualist? Like, did you guys talk about that?
Yeah, so that is what we discussed last week. So last week we were talking about the attitude of a spiritualist. Yeah.
What, like some examples of?
So I think mostly when we were talking about that, what came up was qualities, and the most common qualities that came up were being calm, then tolerant, peaceful, and then not being affected so much by distress, and then also being detached, like not being so much affected by the results of your activities. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think these were the main ones that stood out.
Okay. But again, yeah.
Well, I got an interesting question in, because it's quite clear we're all different nationalities.
Mhm.
I'm more interested in finding out from your own native tongue what you consider to be spiritual.
Mm.
So, because we use the word, but we had this discussion last night about use of English, because we were having dinner last night here, and we were
Yeah.
saying we hate English as the language. So I'm very interested how you all see the spiritual approach from your own upbringing.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is I have a feeling that that's what they were discussing last week. Like, right? Like, what does it actually mean to be spiritual?
Mm.
And then some people were coming up with the externals, like, yeah, being vegetarian is spiritual, or
Yeah.
being calm is spiritual. And these were some of the examples.
Yeah.
So I guess we could discuss individually how we understand spirituality.
Mm.
But I would have a question even more like in terms of, is there like a universal definition of
Yeah.
what spirituality means?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, because we could actually all discuss for hours what we think that it is. But I was wondering if there's any, like, from the yoga text, like a universal definition of being spiritual, because I know people who are calm and, meek and sober, but again, they don't really seem to be into spirituality, they don't seem to be seeking further than that. They just, I'm just a peaceful by nature. So is that really what it means being spiritual? So if there is like a universal definition.
I think
Peter.
what I think Peter was good because I wasn't here in the last box, which led up to this debate. But for instance, I come from the Caribbean region. And the Caribbean is like the islands in the next side of the
Sorry,
Caribbean.
Oh, yeah.
West Indies. And one of the main, especially around the 70s to now, as has to do with my parents, is that when people get spiritual when they start doing their dreadlocks.
Yeah.
I'm not confessing that I'm spiritual, but I'm kind of guessing it. And that's
Yeah.
like one, and
Yeah.
when you did the history of that, it's like there's been natural that it came from different sources because the Caribbean have like Indians who came like a whole philosophy with the Sandus and
Yes,
Hinduism, and
yes.
so that was part of it. And there's some African tribes as well, so it's a mix of African Hindu philosophy. And so your dreadlocks supposed to be some form of like unity with like a kind of spiritual, peaceful, like a natural way of living. But at the same time, not everybody who grows their dreadlocks, you can consider that
Yes,
spiritual.
yeah.
Sometimes now it's a style, but then they're saying now that if you start growing your dreadlocks, even if it's a style or not, that there's something within you that is spiritual that you're trying to manifest that you probably don't know. So that's also some people can do that.
Yeah.
So that's just one cultural aspect of spirituality.
where, in distinction from the Maori, there is no word called spiritual.
All right, okay.
But for us, so it's wairua,
Yeah.
that which is inside, but its physical form for us is water. So we see the river as the spiritual form of the body. But when someone speaks of spirit, we automatically go back to the dead. Because we believe in the dead.
Or ghosts. Or
Ghosts, spirits,
Yeah,
that kind of thing. So which is why for us, where our people are buried is highly significant. from where they are. So spiritual in the text, I'd be interested as well, seeing from the text perspective where they would see that spiritual, where they word spiritual. And I'm sure it's probably different for where you're from or from yourself. I struggle with that. What is spiritual and what is not.
Well, that's good that we're discussing it then.
Yeah. And it's interesting that Justin mentioned that point because this is what came up in our first talk. It's like that people change their look. You know, that they start to wear like loose pants and like grow your hair. Yeah.
The kind of thing that is-
Yes, yeah, the stereotype. Yeah, but these days it's very interesting because you see so many like people who have that look, but they have nothing to do with spirituality. Yeah, but almost maybe like 10, 15 years back, if someone had that look, they would also be into spirituality. Yeah. So you were asking about the universal definition.
Something more universal, which doesn't, which is not like based on the culture or where you're from or how you grew up. Something more like universal that anyone could practice, anyone could understand easily.
Yeah.
Was applied to everyone, no matter where you're from, what
Yes.
religion, what nationality.
Yeah, like science, like science or mathematics. Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. I think it's a very relevant question because also, I was thinking that like these qualities, like inner qualities, tolerance, being calm, being peaceful, they're also so subjective. Like like Ananda, she's very tolerant. But Janaka might say she's not tolerant at all. Like they're so subjective, right? So I also agree that it's quite important to have like an objective understanding of what is spirituality. Because I find it quite interesting because for so many things in life, we want a scientific approach, we want it factual. But somehow when it comes to spirituality, everyone is kind of, like there's this approach that it should be abstract and to each his own. Yeah, but actually the yoga texts, they do make it, they actually do present spirituality in a very objective way. So there's this book here. I don't know if you got this book out here. If you guys want to grab. So there's a definition, right on the start of this book, there's a definition. Is there more? I think that's it. With mine, just with you. So it's right on page 1. There's a definition of what's a spiritual person. So it says that a sober person who can tolerate the urge to speak, the mind's demands, the actions of anger, and the urges of the tongue, belly, and genitals is qualified to make disciples all over the world. So this is, so according to the yoga text, this is actually like the most objective definition of a person who is a transcendental.
Sorry, can you read that out again?
Yeah. A sober person who can tolerate the urge to speak, the mind's demands, the actions of anger, and the urges of the tongue, belly, and genitals is qualified to make disciples all over the world. Yeah, and I think it's quite a good definition because it also it's also like a barometer for oneself that actually you can use it to measure your own self.
In a Christian context, then we would consider that person to be an apostle.
What's that?
It is the same as a disciple by because they are required to follow a path that actually indicates all of these. If they are qualified then to go and
yes, that if they're able to,
if they are able to do all of that.
Yes, yeah. So according to the yoga text, that this is that a person, so naturally spiritual life is a journey, and there are different stages of progress. But a person who has actually achieved self-realization and who is at the top, this is that person. But we understand that spiritual life is a journey and we're progressing towards.
Well, so this is a very powerful verse for me. Like when I read it, it kind of covers both, like how you act externally with your body and what you do internally. So I was thinking if we could break it down, because it's would be good to understand it like properly. What does it mean? So like the first sentence is, spiritualist, sober person is one who tolerates urges to speak. So like my question would be like, how do you do that? Because it's very hard to control the speaking, the urge to speak and also like, what does it mean? Does it mean we have to be like quiet the rest of our life? Or because there's people who, go to Vipassana retreats and they try for 10 days not to speak anything. But then as soon as the Vipassana ends, they go back to their normal life, they go to parties and they start speaking again. So how do you understand? Like, how do you control that urge to speak?
Okay, so the urge to speak, it doesn't actually mean that we don't speak at all. That's not what it means, because as human beings, not just human beings, we see that all life forms, all of them, they have a tongue. And the tongue has two functions. One is to vibrate and the other is to taste. So like every organ, everything has a function. So similarly, the function of the tongue is to vibrate and to taste. So you can't stop the tongue from its function. It's almost like saying that it's almost like asking water to not be liquid. It's just not possible. So similarly, it's not possible for the tongue to not to speak. So what this means here is that a person who can tolerate the urge to speak or who can control their speaking, it means that the tongue or that the speech is focused on spiritual matters and on subjects that elevate our consciousness rather than focusing on material topics and on speaking topics that actually keep us in material consciousness. So that is what it means to control the urge to speak, is to speak on subject matters that will elevate our consciousness. Yeah. So rather than speaking on matters that will keep us on the body platform.
But then what do you do it in a practical life? Because like we go to work or we go to university and people around us all the time talk about material mundane stuff. You talk with your work colleagues about work. At uni you talk about what you're learning at university. So how do you practice speaking topics that elevate your consciousness if you're around people who are not interested in it?
Yeah. Okay. So there is another book by there's another book which is not here. In that book, it's explained that there are two primary, you can classify spiritual activities into two types. So you have primary spiritual activities and you have secondary spiritual activities. So what we're doing here right now, this is obviously it's a primary spiritual activity because this is direct. We're directly talking about how to make spiritual progress or how to progress in spiritual life. But in order to have a spiritual life, we need to have a life, right? And in order to have a life, we need to eat, we need to maintain ourselves. And in order to do that, we need to go to work, we need to study, we need to clean our bodies, we need to have relationships, we need to have family. And these are all the things we need to do in order to have a life. When we have a life, then we can have a spiritual life. Now, what happens is that unfortunately, people get so busy just in their life that they forget about their spiritual life. But for a person who is on a spiritual path, they do these life activities like eating, working, going to university, having friends, having relationships. They do these things with the purpose of having a solid spiritual life. So for example, when I'm going to work or when I'm at university, I'm doing those things so that I know I need to earn money so that I can have a spiritual lifestyle. So because the purpose of my primary activities is to fund or to fuel my spiritual activities, then these life activities, they become secondary spiritual activities. And then whatever I do in them is also spiritualized. So for example, when I go to work, I'm working solely for the purpose of making money so that I can maintain a life of spirituality. So now when I'm at work, of course, I'm not going to talk about spirituality. I'm going to speak to my boss about work. I'm going to make sure that I'm doing my best there. But I will only talk what is necessary. So I won't engage in office politics. I won't waste my tongue in talking about, engaging in gossip, in criticizing, but about improving productivity, about the difference that I can make to people's lives there. So similarly at university as well. So when the goal is clear in your mind, that actually why am I doing this? Then your consciousness is in the right place. And then even though you're talking about material activities, your consciousness does not get implicated. So from an external perspective, there might seem no difference between a spiritual person and a material person because they're doing the exact same thing. But the difference is in consciousness. Yeah, that what is the reason why this person is doing these activities? And then you mentioned about friends, and otherwise I'll forget. Then you mentioned about friends, right? That you're hanging out with people, who are not interested in spirituality. So, of course, spiritual life is a journey. And a person, as we are progressing, like as we are moving ahead in our spiritual life, because we are experiencing the benefits, we gradually become more and more serious about it. And then a person who is becoming serious about spiritual life, then they do not like to spend time with those who are not interested in spirituality. Because they sort of feel that they have had a shift of mindset, that their values have shifted, from those people who are not interested in spirituality. So normally you see, that you drift apart and you sort of find like a new circle of friends. Yeah, so a spiritualist will make that conscious choice to stop hanging out with people, who are not interested in spirituality.
And I guess that also happens naturally in life. I'm sure we all experienced it, that as we grow in life, our values change, right? The purpose of life changes, and we naturally like shift from this group of friends to this group of friends. Like I remember I used to be like, when I was 17, I would just hang out with friends who would like to party and take drugs. And then I realized that wasn't like, at some point I just lost interest in it. And then I started, hanging out with another group of friends who were more into like Buddhism or yoga. And so even materially we change association based on our values. And I was thinking if you guys wanted to like share with us, all of us together, like if you have experienced this as well, that the values of your life are changing and you were shifting your association.
I think for me, I think it's about the age as well. Like, when I was in Thailand, I used to like party a lot. And like I have like a different group of friends to like hang out. But I think, it's come with the age. Like once, like I experienced that. Yeah, and at one point I'm just like sick of it. And then just like grow up and like meet more people in life. And I would say like I try to be more open. And it's okay because we are all human and everyone is different. And even right now I'm not say that I'm like spiritual. Actually, I don't know what that is, but today I just like, I just met you, and then you like invite me to this workshop. So I was like, maybe I should like give a try and get to learn more about this concept. Because they're quite interesting in like healthy lifestyle, and I think like everyone have different experience, and once everyone grow up, like people change. And I really like when you mentioned about universe stuff because it is something that I like believe. I believe that I really believe in a universe, and I believe like something about karma. And if you do the good things, you will like attach all the good things. Is that like answer your questions?
Yeah, thank you so much. I was actually thinking because we have only 20 minutes left, maybe we can, if you guys want, we can continue, or we can all share something, up to you. Like, is for everyone clear what it means tolerate the urge to speak? Is pretty clear, and we don't have to be scared like, oh, I have to lose, I have to give up all my friends and stop talking to people. No, it's not like, it's very natural. Like you change your values, and naturally you attract people who are interested in the same stuff.
But for me, I think what changed my life in a way in terms of, okay, friendships and so on changed, but I think for me it was definitely traveling and experiencing different lifestyle. Okay, so I come from a Western society where like in the middle of North America, South America, so it's very westernized, and Europe, right, across the oceans. But like when I traveled like to maybe to the east for the first time, I mean this is like maybe 10 years ago, like India, Singapore, Indonesia, and experiencing like Buddhism, Hinduism, although we have Hinduism back home in my country. I think that also opened me up to a whole Eastern or Oriental type of way of living, which was totally opposite to the Western way of living. And I think that also helped me well realizing, okay, there's more to it than I don't even want to talk about there's more to it than Christianity or this westernized movement, like other Buddhism, and you know, so that really kind of opened up my eyes, and I was very intrigued because the Eastern worldview is much different from the Western world. So that's something I thought that was.
Anyone else like to share?
You wanted to say something before, right?
Even coming to New Zealand, sorry, even with New Zealand with the Maori culture and worldview, I just that also is okay. New Zealand is westernized, you know, even though it's really far from everybody else. But the Maori worldview is also, for me, also something that I never knew about, and it's also appealing.
Yeah, I believe we probably share a common belief that we are the native indigenous peoples and that we ended up being colonized. So if we go back to that previous colonization, our understanding of what we call spirit, the spiritual path has been, I'd say, tainted, in our case, by 300, 400 years of colonization and the use of the English language and all of that. So I struggle with spirituality in its international or national concept, the generalization of it. And it has been difficult because you're all new people to understand that when you come here, your spiritual, your wider is so completely different. There's no general path as such. It's just an alphabet soup of different things that have been thrown together, and here's the bowl. And white people do struggle with that. They really, really struggle with, which is why we tend to isolate ourselves within this little bubble. And I won't say we fear, but we do not understand. So the concept of spiritual has been brought to us from external parts, very simple. So who do you believe?
But people always say there's a difference between spiritual and religion.
Well, see, we had that discussion last night that those two, the word religion, and I brought the word faith, belief. You know, it's what one's faith and belief, and how that path, that journey, or the hikoi. So when we look at someone, we look at their faith path or the hikoi of the path. How are they walking? Do they speak by their actions and talk? And that's how we judge. Hence we put tongues of people.
Right, the tongue to the Maori.
The tongue is spatial, is about seeing the true
Yeah,
nature
what
of
was
the
the
person.
importance of the tongue in all those spaces? What's important?
It's more the
That's
chip.
connected to what we were speaking about.
It goes back to pre-colonial times, and it is about that whole meeting of cultures or people for the first time. It's about the way a person expresses themselves and how they express themselves in the eyes and the mouth and the face. So what we say, kanohi ki kanohi, face to face. So how one speaks eye to eye is very, very important to us. So we're not much of speakers, we're more listeners. So we listen and see. They're listening, very bad. Very, very bad.
Yeah, there's a reason why we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. We are supposed to listen more than to speak, and that's basically what this verse means. Like you tolerate the urge to speak because people just speak about so many things all the time. Yeah. That's why I really like this word because it is actually a universal definition. It says tolerate the urge to speak, and that's why we had this question at the beginning, like, what is it? What is it actually? What's the real definition of being spiritual? And this actually has nothing to do with any religion or race or culture. It's a universal principle, like speak about topics that elevate you, and it could be in different cultures. You can speak in your language, but speak about topics that elevate you, not put you more down.
That's how I interpreted that paragraph. I interpreted this, not that you don't speak at all, but you listen before you speak. That's how I interpreted it.
You listen before you speak
Listen
and
before you speak,
talk
I
about
speak when
stuff.
you need to speak.
Yeah, and talk about topics that elevate you, that brings you closer to your spiritual core.
Where that paragraph come from, by the way? Was it just an author or is it from a text?
It's a text, yeah. This is a very, it's a more than 500-year-old book.
Oh, okay. Oh, the book itself, yeah.
Yeah, this book itself.
All right.
Yeah.
So if you guys are happy with that definition, the urge to speak, we'll understand we can get to a next one. So the next one means, so spiritual person can tolerate the mind's demands. The mind's demands, like, can you please explain this to us? How do you tolerate mind's demands? Because I feel like I can control what I talk about, but I definitely can't control what's going on in here. It's very active, the mind. So, and why is it that we have to control mind's demands to be spiritual?
Okay, so further in this text, it is explained that what does it actually mean? Like, what does it mean by the mind's demands? So it explains that the mind has only one demand, which is unrestricted attachment. This is the challenge of the mind, that unrestricted attachment, and this manifests in two ways: in attachment and aversion. So aversion is just the flip side of attachment. So we all understand what attachment means, right? That I have the desire to want something, and then if I don't get it, then it causes me great grief. So that is what it means to be attached. Like, it's not just necessary for things, it can also be to an idea. Like, I have a certain idea of how things should be done, and if they don't happen that way, then it causes me grief. It can be for people, it can be for jobs, for place, for our hopes in life. So that's the challenge of the mind, that as soon as the mind hears about, so we have our senses, right? So we have 5 senses for acquiring knowledge, and all stimulus comes to us from these 5 knowledge acquiring senses. So every sense has an object. So you have senses and sense objects. So every sense is an object. So for example, food is a sense object for the tongue. Soft skin is a sense object for touch. So every sense is a sense object. So as soon as the mind thinks of a sense object, 2 things can happen. Either the mind becomes instantly attached, or there is instant aversion. So for example, as soon as I think of a cockroach, or if I visualize a cockroach, there is instant aversion in my mind. And as soon as I picture, I see a cake, there is instant attachment. So this is the problem, that the mind is unrestricted in terms of either attachment or aversion. So this is what it means, that the mind is just, like if you've seen a frog and you see how the frog like instantly just takes out its tongue. That's the mind. If the mind has so many and it's just constantly going and or throwing things away. And that's why it's there is so much trouble, because it's explained that in human form of life, that in every species, every form of life has one sense which is very active. But in human form of life, all 5 senses are go. So that's the challenge, that all 5 senses are go means it's constantly grabbing. So that's the problem of the mind, unrestricted attachment. And so why do we need to control the mind? Is because if we don't, because it's just natural, right, that we are not going to get everything we want. And because we're not going to get everything we want, it's going to cause us distress. And the other problem is, even if we get what we want, it doesn't, most of the time, it doesn't turn out to be the way we want it. And even if it is the way we want it, it only lasts for a short time.
Yeah.
So this is the problem with attachment. There are three things. Either we don't get what we want. If we get it, it's not the way we want. And if it's first two, it doesn't last for long. So naturally, so this attachment is followed by lamentation. So until we get what we want, we are hankering to get what we want. And when we get it, then we are lamenting. And even if all three things are ticked, that we got what we wanted, it's the way we wanted, and we feel that it's not temporary, it's going to last, then we are in anxiety. There is fear that I'm going to lose it. Yeah, that how long is that? This is too good to be true.
Yeah, 100%.
So this is the problem with unrestricted attachment. So this is why we need to control the mind.
But I have a friend who was once telling me, and he's kind of, he thinks he's kind of savvy, but
Yeah.
he was once telling me the way to deal with that is just think that the mind doesn't exist. Now that is like another level of things, right? But he just like, you know, to control the mind, you have to believe that the mind does not exist. And it's like illusion, or like if you watch the Matrix movie. Like,
Yes.
but that was his response. What do you think about it?
I think I would like to see his daily activities, because it's one, and that is why this is the beauty of this verse, because it has both internal and external. Because like someone can say to behave like the mind doesn't exist, but what are their activities? Because one's philosophy has to be manifested in their actions. So there's this beautiful, so Prabhupada, he's the one who's writing these books, he writes very beautifully that religion without philosophy is fanaticism. And philosophy without religion is feeling sentiment. So you need both talking and words. I'm completely, I wouldn't agree with that. How can you say the mind doesn't exist? Because the mind is the CPU. You know, like without the mind, basically we are like a software, and the mind is the CPU. So if there is no processing unit, how will everything function? Yeah. And the next question was, how do we control the mind? Okay, so there are 2-3 bona fide systems of controlling the mind. So one of them is, and I would call it an artificial method or a temporary method, because it works on the same level. So basically, our body has 3. So we are self, this concept of self, we have 3 levels. So one is the physical body, and then we have the mind and the intelligence and the ego, false ego, that's the subtle body. And then we have the real spiritual self, which is us. So when we think of our body, we only think of the physical body, but actually the mind is also the subtle body. So the mind is also made of matter. Now, we can identify ourselves fully with our mind. Like I think that I'm my personality. But if I was to give you some psychotic drugs, some antipsychotic drugs, your personality would completely change. And then you would know that you are not your mind. Then you would know that actually mind is also matter. So you can try to control your mind artificially. Which is like you have meditation techniques like, okay, so a thought is entering my mind, so I have to try to nullify that thought. I have to try to cancel it, like not think about it. Then the silent meditation is also a method of controlling the mind, but this is also, like, I would call it an artificial method, because it doesn't solve the problem for a long, in a sustainable way. So to properly control the mind, you have to go to a higher level. Like Albert Einstein says, that you can't solve the problem at the same level. So you have to go to a higher level. So above the mind is the spirit soul. Is the spirit soul. So if our spiritual nature is strong, then naturally everything else, the mind comes under control. So how do we strengthen our spiritual nature? By doing spiritual practices. And so there is something called as, so a very ancient spiritual practice is called as mantra chanting, like mantra meditation. So man means mind and tra means to free. So mantra means to free the mind. So doing mantra meditation or chanting mantras is a very simple and easy way to control the mind. Because what it does is instead of trying to, because what mantra meditation does is that instead of actually trying to like nullify the thoughts, it connects you with your spiritual self. And then it gives you a higher pleasure, a higher spiritual pleasure. And once you connect with that spiritual pleasure, you no longer really want to dwell on the level of the mind. So to quieten the mind, the most recommended practice is mantra meditation. And for the time that we are in, the most recommended mantra is the Hare Krishna mantra. Yeah. Yes.
Would meditation and yoga be a part of that process as well?
Yes. So yoga, the system of yoga actually has 8 steps. And the first 2 steps are yama niyama, so do's and don'ts. Third step is asana, the yoga practice, the actual physical postures. Then the 7th and the 8th step, like the 5th and 6th step is breathing. And the 7th and the 8th step. So 7th step is dhyan, which is meditation. And 8th step is samadhi, which is trance, which is full self-realization. Yeah. So we suggest that you directly start from the 7th step. Yeah, which is meditation. And of course there are some do's and don'ts. So you can see that this verse here, this is a combination of do's and don'ts, right? So you're saying tolerate the urge to speak. This is a don't.
Yeah. So the asana, which is the
3rd step.
which is the yoga as we
Yes.
that room here. That is a good form of meditation.
So actually the purpose of asana is to quieten the mind. Because what asana does is it brings you to a particular energy level, which is called as the mode of goodness, to sattva, and that helps to quieten your mind. So there are 2 purposes of asana. One is that by practicing asana, all your bodily functions can be harmonized. Like you can have a perfectly healthy, functioning body. And only once the body is healthy, then you can actually focus on higher spiritual matters. Otherwise, you'll just be focused on, I have bad digestion or I have insomnia. How can you think about spiritual matters if your body is not functioning? So that's why you have asana and then you have pranayama, which is the breathing. Yeah. So after asana, you have pranayama, which helps you to further quieten the mind. And then comes dhyan, which is actual meditation. So yoga is actually a full, very holistic process, which also includes eating. Yeah, so it's eating as well. Yeah, it comes in the next step, which is pratyahara, which means to control what goes in and what comes out.
That's number 5.
Pratyahara, that is step 4.
Oh. After asana.
After asana.
All right.
Which is also spoken about in this one. So we.
Okay, well, thank you. That was very exhausting answer. Is everyone happy with that? Like, how to literally remind me one. Okay, so let's get to the 3rd one. A sober person is one who can tolerate actions of anger and the urges of the tongue. So let's discuss the first one. The first point, actions of anger. So how would you define, anger and why is it bad? Why do we have to tolerate this?
Yeah, so anger actually connects with the mind. So as I was explaining before, when we have unrestricted attachment, it naturally leads to anger because frustration of material desires produces anger. And now because we are living in this world, all of us have desires and it's natural that all of them are not satisfied. So it's natural for all of us to experience anger or frustration. It's just natural. Now, the thing is that if you understand that every emotion is a certain type of energy, and we can use every emotion positively. So the thing with anger is that how do we use it positively? Okay, I'm feeling this emotion. So you see, now if you think about it, there are 2 ways of looking at it. Like people are angry at society, people are angry at the government, people are angry at the corruption, how at the level of corruption. People are angry at how there is so much pollution. Like there's one anger which is at societal level. So in order to deal with that, and then also like we can be angry at some people who are not behaving with us properly, or things that are not working out in our life, So if we actually look at what we are angry at and why are we angry, if we take a step back, then we can see that actually all problems arise from acting out of material consciousness. Like when we act at this level that I'm, that I'm this body and I'm this mind, and basically I'm angry because things are not working out for my pleasure or for the pleasure of my connections, my extended family, my nation, that produces anger. But if we understand that actually I'm spirit soul and I'm different from this body and mind, and I'm not affected by what's happening, then naturally you can use that anger for a positive cause. Because then we can use that anger by practically manifesting it in working hard to solve this problem of material consciousness. We can work hard to elevate people's consciousness, to elevate society's consciousness to a spiritual level, so that these problems don't exist. Like one example that I can think of is, you see, that the government, it puts so many signs about don't litter. And so the reason why the government is doing that, so that people don't litter. So the government is educating people so that people won't litter. So similarly, like instead of being angry and shouting at people, why are you littering and why are you doing this and why are you doing that? Instead, it's a positive step. Let's educate people, don't litter. So similarly, if we use that, we can channel our anger. We just channel it to work hard to improve our own spiritual consciousness, because the more spiritual we are, the less upset we will be when things are not working our way. And the more we work hard to give spirituality to others, then we'll be in a better environment. Yeah. It's like when people become sustainable, they start to use eco products, and they tell others to use eco products, so that it's a more good environment. So like that.
Eco products are more expensive.
Yeah. Unfortunately, just like capitalized. Yeah.
Not your
Not your pocket.
Yes.
Excuse me, one. Okay.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Peter.
See you next.
We'll thank you dinner.
I'll go out and get angry at some players.
All right, bye.
Have a good day.
You too.
All out of you.
So I was just thinking of what you said just now. Yeah, that you're trying to say that maybe I misunderstood, but you're separate from your mind. And you said you have to separate yourself from your mind and your emotions. So your whole being is separate from your mind.
Yes, so we actually see that because we are actually spirit souls, we are actually spiritual in nature. And so we are spirit souls having a human experience. So for example, if you have a bottle of capsules, so you have the bottle, the plastic bottle. Inside the plastic bottle, there's a capsule. And you can open the capsule, and inside the capsule, there is the powder. So we are actually the powder. So that's the spirit soul. And then there's the capsule. You know what's a capsule, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
That's
the,
like a human body.
no. So the capsule is the mind.
Oh, all right.
The capsule is the mind and intelligence. And the plastic bottle is the body.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So actually the powder that's inside the capsule is not affected by what's happening with the bottle. And neither is it affected by what's happening.
Almost like those Russian dolls, right? Just
Yes.
open them and they
Correct.
get smaller and smaller, right?
It's like you're peeling the onion. So these are like our external layers. But when I think, like for example, I'm driving a car. If I think that I am the car, every small scratch that the car has, I get so affected. Now, if you're sitting here and you hear a car crash outside, you'll be like, oh no, the car got crashed. Is everyone okay? You feel bad. But if it was your car, you would feel a lot more bad. So what's the difference? It's a car, right? But the fact is that you are attached to it. It's that attachment that causes that pain. So because we are attached to our body and mind, we experience that pain. Like, now for example, if you have a breakup, I'll feel sorry for you. But, I'll feel sad for you. But when I have a breakup, it would be much worse. Yeah, because I'm attached.
You experience yourself.
Yes, and I'm more attached to myself. Yeah. So,
I think that's very interesting for the, the attachment. So one thing that I think of is about like time is kind of like healing as well.
Mm.
You know, like example, like the car crash, like your car is crashed, and at that time you feel like super angry, but like after that, like 1 week or a month later, you more feel like accepted that
Yes.
it's something that already happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. I've always thought about this fact that time, the time is a healing thing, but actually, if you were to closely analyze it, yes, time heals in the sense that it makes you, that it sort of eases the pain, but actually, it doesn't heal you because it leaves a scar behind, which makes you more and more and more closed.
Yeah.
So the most vivid example that I can give is of a relationship, is that every time you have a heartbreak, fair enough, let's say you have a heartbreak and 1 year later you recover
Yeah.
and you say, okay, you've healed. But the fact is that for your next relationship, your heart will be more closed.
Yeah.
You will be more careful. So it hasn't actually healed.
Yeah.
And then for the next relationship, you're even more closed. You
Yeah.
will have more and more trust issues. That's why you see these days relationships have so many issues. Because we are so scared to open ourselves because we've had so many heartbreaks.
I think it's about like trauma, right?
Yeah.
You like have that bad experience and you just like, your brain just control you that you have to like protect yourself.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not really healing.
Mm.
If you think about it, it's not really healing.
Yeah.
It's just putting more layers on to protect you. But and it's actually
To be
inhibiting
like
you
more
from
wise.
it's inhibiting you from having fully loving relationships. Yeah. Because healing means that you can give your heart fully again, but you can't.
Yeah.
Okay. So we were talking about
How to tolerate anger.
anger. Yeah.
That was pretty clear definition.
Yeah. Would you like to add to that?
Add to that.
On anger.
I was just thinking that there is certain type of anger, like material anger, which is actually like beneficial. Like if, let's say, someone is, abusing our friend or our child or abusing us, then we can also use anger in that sense, like
Yeah.
protection. So that's also like a positive way.
Yes. Yeah.
But I really like your definition, how you said, when it comes to, our demands, then we get frustrated if we don't get, our demands fulfilled. So that's like an unnecessary anger, which we can experience
Yeah.
on a daily basis, which I can see it's detrimental for our spiritual life.
Yeah.
Is that what you kind of meant, or is there
Yeah.
anything else you can?
Yeah. No, I like healthy anger.
Healthy anger. So we've got 6 minutes left. So do we want to go to conclusion or continue?
I think we can just
Do one more? So we've got tolerating the urges of tongue. So because we already talked about urges of speaking, then urges of tongue, is it kind of similar or is it related more to like eating?
Yeah. So this urges of the tongue is related to taste. Yeah. So it's natural, So urge of the tongue is that we want to eat palatable food. We want to eat all kinds of tasty things. Yeah.
And it's also tolerating urges of the belly, so that would be related, right? Like,
Yeah. So urge of the belly is overeating. Yeah.
so how are we supposed to then eat? How are we supposed to control our tongue? Like, is it about what we eat or?
Yeah. So controlling the urge of the tongue here means that we eat foods that are non-violent, that are not violent. So basically it is explained in the yoga text that every species of life has a certain quota. So for humans, the quota, because we all need to eat because we need food to live. So for human beings, the quota is grains, vegetables, legumes, milk, nuts, all these things. They are enough to nourish us sufficiently, to stay healthy and have an active life. So these things are sufficient. So yeah.
And then, so you're saying that we should eat that which is not connected to violence.
Yeah.
So that means not eating meat.
Yeah.
But then meat eaters might argue that, you vegetarians are killing plants.
Yes.
So,
Yeah. It's definitely true. So as I mentioned before, that we have to live, so that we have to eat to live. So definitely we have to eat something. So if we eat what is our quota, then the karma that we get is much less than what we would get if we were eating outside our quota. So the level of consciousness of plants is much, much more less than the level of consciousness of animals. So the pain and suffering that an animal feels when it's killed is much, much more than the pain and suffering that a plant feels when it's killed. In saying that, even vegetarians get karma for eating plants. And so, so that is why, like what we do here at the Loft, or what's a yoga practice, is that whatever you cook, it is cooked in a mood of love and devotion, to offer it back to the Supreme Source, Krishna. So before we actually eat the food is first offered to Krishna, and then it is accepted. So this act of actually offering food back to the Supreme Source, it nullifies the karma associated with it, because it spiritualizes the food, and it also immunizes us from any material affection that can come in taking the food. So for example, I think you guys must have heard, that the consciousness of the cook goes in the food. So if a person is very angry and if they're cooking, then if you eat that food, you will also get angry. So by offering the food, you're like sort of nullifying all that. You don't take on that stuff.
But isn't the difference to say, okay, I'm not really eating the plant itself? Because when I think about a plant, I'm thinking like leaves and stems and flowers. But I'm not eating the plant itself, but I'm eating the fruit of the plant. So I'm eating the vegetable that comes from the plant, or I'm eating the apple that comes to the tree.
Yes.
So does the apple have consciousness, or does the fruit have consciousness? I mean,
Yes, because the fruit is a product of the plant, and the plant has consciousness. Yeah.
We're not killing the plant, we're not killing the fruit.
Yes, but in eating some plants, you do kill them, isn't it? Like
Some,
you have- yeah,
all of those ones.
like
Yeah,
root
say-
plants. Yeah.
Yeah, but what the other ones are fine. Like tomatoes and other kind of apples.
Yes.
You're just picking it up.
Just picking it
So it's okay.
yeah.
So you're killing the plant. Yeah.
But I was thinking that I never go with that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a vegetarian. But
Yes.
Okay, so we have only last one left, guys, so we're doing really well. So that one is a hard one. So the spiritualists can tolerate urges of the genitals. So everyone would argue like, no way, I can't do this. This is so pleasurable. Why do I have to give it up? And, how do you do that? How do you control that?
Okay, so the first question, so why do you actually have to give it up? So the yoga texts explain that sex is the highest material pleasure, that no material activity will bring you more pleasure than sex. And it's like, like there is no more pleasure to discover beyond the pleasure of sex. But, and having said that, now if you look around today in the world, everyone is having sex, but it doesn't mean that people are happy. So it's like, I think it's understood that sex, it doesn't bring lasting happiness. It makes you feel good for the moment, and it doesn't change your consciousness. It's not, it's just makes you feel good for the moment. So now saying that sex is the highest pleasure, so why is it that we have to control it? So the problem with sex is that because it's the activity that brings the highest material pleasure, it comes with a consequence, which is that it produces, so I'm just going to rewind a little bit, that every action that we do, it has a direct implication on our consciousness. So for example, if a child puts his hand, not a child, if anyone, if we put our hand in fire, and if our hand burns, of course, that's one effect that we're seeing, that our finger is burned. But at the same time, we're registering in our head that fire burns. So next time, I'm going to be careful from fire. So what I'm saying is that there is a mental act happening. There's something happening in my consciousness with every action that I do. So similarly, when we engage in sex, it embeds this idea in our consciousness at a very deep level that I am this body, and my happiness is going to come from bodily activities. Because sex is the biggest, it's the deepest bodily activity that you can do. So when we have sex, it ingrains this consciousness even more that I am this body, and my happiness is coming from this body. And the problem with this bodily consciousness is because bodies matter and matter is temporary,
Yeah.
then we're just swinging in happiness and distress, which is temporary, comes and goes, comes and goes.
Yeah.
So a person who is on a spiritual path, they are actually trying to become free from this material consciousness. So then naturally a person is on a spiritual path, they want to minimize activities that increase this bodily consciousness. And they want to increase activities that increase spiritual consciousness. So that is why a spiritual person will try to minimize, like sex, because it really embeds this consciousness in you that my happiness is coming from my body, and other people's bodies are meant to bring me happiness. Yeah. So it embeds this consciousness, and now this and also like of course if you think about it from the other angle that naturally sex is meant for procreation, but we are now using it for recreation. So if we want to use it for recreation, like if we want to use contraception, then the outcome of every sexual activity would be kids. And then how many kids can we have? So the nature's way of limiting sex is kids.
Yeah.
Because there's only so many kids you can handle.
So then, in that way, then sexual intercourse is not wrong if you do it with the mind of procreation.
No, not at all. No, and that is actually the way to control it. Because that is nature's way of inculcating responsibility. There's no harm in having sex, but you just take the responsibility for your action, which is kids. So actually, if you think about it, everything in nature, it's properly, it's designed to help us to move towards self-realization. If we overeat, we get an upset stomach. So it's automatically teaching us don't overeat. So similarly, if we have sex, there are kids. So how much sex are you going to have? Because how much, so it just cut it. So, yeah. But now it's saying this, like living in the society that we are living in, it is, like how are we actually going to control sex?
Yeah.
So, so again, going back to that point, that it is only possible, that it is actually not possible to control the sexual urge because it is the strongest urge in the body. So the way to control it is to get a higher pleasure. So if sex is the highest material, so naturally, if sex is the highest material pleasure, you have to experience a pleasure that is higher than it.
But spiritual.
Yes. And once you experience a spiritual pleasure, so what happens is when you actually experience spiritual pleasure, you naturally lose the desire for material pleasure. So then it's not an artificial process anymore. You don't feel like I'm controlling, and you don't feel like you have to give it up because you are in touch with the spiritual pleasure. Like the easiest example that comes to my mind is of a child who is obsessed with a toy. And you know what parents do is like they just bring another toy and then the child just moves on with the new toy.
Yeah.
So it's something like that. So for all of these, like it may seem very challenging that all these urges, that to control this, control that. But actually, like the ideal yoga process is that if you get a spiritual pleasure, higher spiritual pleasure, then all these body and mind urges can just be automatically controlled. Yeah, and the easiest way to get that, like the easiest technique is through mantra meditation. And actually that is also the whole purpose for the loft, that we are here. The loft is here to actually give people a spiritual experience. Yeah, that's why the food tastes so nice, so that we know, okay, that we don't have to eat violent food and.
Well, thank you so much, Munja. You explained everything really nicely. I think it makes a lot of sense. So if we can recap, someone who is on a spiritual journey, they speak topics that elevate the consciousness, ideally in a group of friends, like-minded friends who are spiritual seekers. Spiritualist, controls the mind demands by doing like mantra meditation that kind of draws your mind to a spiritual sound that helps to control like that aversion and attachment that the mind produces. And spiritualist controls the action of anger, which basically is just a consequence of being frustrated from not being fulfilled on a material level. And you try to eat food that's that's non-violent, like vegetarian food that's offered to higher consciousness, and yeah, you minimize activities of sex, which is the highest material pleasure, but actually doesn't satisfy anyone because everyone does it all the time, but people are not happy, people are more miserable. So that's a very nice, practical definition of spiritualism. How can we actually like, stay on track without getting frustrated? Like, is there any like a key formulas so that we like keep, on track without getting like, oh, this is just too hard. This is like too much for me, like, yeah.
Okay, so I would just suggest, like my simple suggestion would be to just start a daily practice. Just to have a daily practice. Actually, in the same book, can I just say, if you go to text 3 of this book, it's page 27. So it says, it gives 4 key principles here. That is, that one should follow the spiritual practice of, follow spiritual practice with enthusiasm, confidence, and patience. So like for example, if you're training for a marathon, you see an athlete, they have a regular practice, they practice. If you're doing yoga, you practice. If you go to work, you go every day. Like everything takes practice and patience. And the beauty of the beauty of a spiritual practice is that it's not that you have to wait to get the result, but even as you're practicing, you get the result. And so you see that it's working for you, and so then you keep going. So when we take up a spiritual practice, we should follow it with 3 principles: with enthusiasm, with confidence, and patience. So I would just suggest, that you guys, if you want, you can give this mantra meditation a try. We just start by like as little as like 5 minutes a day, and just keep to it. Maybe get a book, read for 5 minutes a day. Just add a little bit of spirituality.
Would you like to tell us what is the next week's topic? So we get.
Yes. So next week we're going to talk about. I thought we could do 2 topics, and then maybe you guys can suggest which one. So one topic that was in my mind was how to become happy, and then the second topic was which is the best cause to associate ourselves with. So we see, there are so many causes like veganism, environmentalism, cure cancer, like so many causes in society. So which is the best cause to associate with? Or this is one topic, or the second topic is like, what are the different ways to achieve happiness? Which one sounds more exciting to you guys?
I like.
Both of them are interesting.
Yeah, I personally prefer the first one. I think like the
Happiness one, different ways to get happiness.
I feel like it's so hard to define happiness, and like everyone has different value.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's interesting.
Okay, maybe we can do that.
Oh, actually, like we should vote. Not from
We should vote.
Not from me.
Okay, should we guys? So how many?
Yeah, you guys are happy with that?
Yeah. What would you know?
What's your opinion?
I think that I'd be quite interested in the second one.
In the causes?
Yeah, because you get asked to support so many causes. And you don't know, and then you feel bad.
Actually, I'm open.
Yeah.
Like any.
Yeah. Well, what we could do is we could do happiness one week, and then the next week we could do cause.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could do both of them. Cool.
Thanks so much, Munja, and that was very nice.
Well, thank you so much for hosting. Thank you for coming
Oh, that was so good.
and for your inputs.